One of the funniest and most insane sagas of the sim racing industry period has to be the pair of Need for Speed Shift games released by Electronic Arts and Slightly Mad Studios. The sim community were pretty hopeful that SMS would just put their heads down and work on GTR3 in the late 2000s, so naturally they partnered with EA of all companies and released a pair of racing simulators with all the racing simulator stuff turned off. Yet because Gran Turismo and Forza were both console exclusives, and the game looked and sounded miles ahead of any other racing sim on the market at that point in time, a lot of people begrudgingly put a lot of hours into these games and started modding the shit out of them, which is what we're playing with today. This is the FIA GT3 2012 mod for Shift 2 Unleashed, and all this does is add the Ferrari 458, McLaren 12C, and Mercedes SLS AMG GT3 cars to the already strong roster of officially licensed GT3 rides found in the game. So, what are these cars doing in Shift 2 Unleashed? The game's set up identical to something like Forza Motorsport or Gran Turismo, where you start out with a street car, you do a bunch of races, you upgrade it, and eventually, after several days of play, you wind up in the big championship at the end of the game. The big championship at the end of the game is just the FIA GT1 and GT3 series. Does that theoretically make Shift 2 Unleashed GTR3? In my opinion, it does. And if you have the DLC, which I believe comes just stock with the Origin version now, the DLC adds a tier to career mode that is literally just GT Legends. I always thought that was a pretty interesting and compelling package. I mean, I'm nerdy enough to enjoy racing sims as they are, but a lot of my buddies just aren't. It's a hard sell. What Shift 2 does is it takes the overall experience of GTR2 and GT Legends, the cars, the tracks, the general handling model, which we'll get to in a bit, and it makes it all just slightly easier to digest. And from that point forward, the game really acts as a gateway drug. The game is good enough on its own as just a cool, feature-rich racing game that you can hang out and play, and it takes a bit of skill to get good at, but also, kind of gets the noggin jogging about, hey, if you want something more hardcore than this, there's an entire world of games like these with these exact cars and tracks on the computer that you might be interested in. And if it bothers you that this game doesn't have pit stops or tire wear or longer races, you should actually go and check those out. This is how a lot of people 10 years ago got into sim racing. They started out on Shift 2 Unleashed and eventually making mods for Shift 2 Unleashed, and once they took that as far as it could go, then they started experimenting with stuff like R Factor or eventually Assetto Corsa. Games like this exist in other genres too, you just probably haven't recognized them. Guys that start on Call of Duty eventually find their way to Arma. Guys who really enjoyed playing Ace Combat growing up eventually start playing stuff like Project Wingman or DCS as they get older. That's what Shift 2 was to a lot of people. It was a gateway drug. Playing back the footage here in Sony Vegas, it's also a damn good looking gateway drug. And this is what sucked a ton of people into this game, even if they were on the fence about a lot of the sim elements being removed. You have to consider what racing sims as a whole looked like in the spring of 2011 when this came out. NASCAR 03 was already 8 or 9 years old. R Factor and Race 07 and its various expansion packs all looked very dry and sterile. Forza and Gran Turismo were at the top of the charts, sure, but in hindsight, they weren't the visual effects powerhouses that they are today. When this game launched, it was the best looking racing game, period, and even 10 or 11 years later, as I play this in 2022, this game does not look 11 years old. This game looks like it came out 2 years ago. The blinding effects of the sunlight and the unique shade of yellow and orange it produces deep in the afternoon is perfect. The way it illuminates the tarmac and the kind of matte finish of the rubber buildup is perfect. The sunlight glow between the buildings in the distance there is perfect. The environment texture work is perfect. The little marbles you'll see built up around the edges of the track, people don't even do this to this day. The depth of field and motion blur effects are tastefully done. When you pass under a shadowed area like we're doing here, the cockpit gets noticeably dark. This game is 11 years old. It doesn't look 11 years old. It looks incredible. My biggest issue with this game is ironically not the suicidal AI which has been on full display in this video. In some ways it can be forgiven because you are designed to be playing this game in short little sprint races and not multi-hour affairs with pit strategies and tire wear and stuff like that, but rather some of the business decisions EA made when it came to releasing content for this game. The Gran Turismo CarPG formula is very tough to get right. Little elements such as the cost of certain cars in career mode or how much money the player earns per race can have a butterfly effect across the entire game, and EA's content plan basically broke any balance seen in Shift 2 Unleashed. The Speed Hunters DLC gave you incredibly overpowered cars added to your garage for free. Other overpowered or desirable cars or career events that paid out way too much for where you were at in career mode were hidden behind things like promo codes on a bottle of Dr. Pepper, or having a save file from Criterion's Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, or buying the collector's edition of the game. From the original Shift released in fall 2009 through NFS The Run released in the fall of 2011, this annoying scavenger hunt EA made people go on to attain all available content for the game was just really annoying. This makes the PC version of Shift 2 Unleashed the superior version to have because a mod can just unlock it all for you. Mods also played a pretty integral role in prolonging Shift 2's lifespan, thanks to the two most prominent handling mods that arose from the community, the G-Tires mod, as well as the PTMU mod, otherwise known as Polish Tires, that turned Shift 2 into more of a traditional racing sim experience. I'm not actually running either in this video. I'll probably do a series of these showcasing the different handling characteristics of both the G-Tires and PTMU mod. This is vanilla Shift 2 handling, and at least in GT3 and GT1 cars, it's really not terrible. The Shift games were pretty controversial within the sim racing community because the cars tended to float around like boats on ice, but as I'm demonstrating here, as you get into the upper class cars, the handling model, in my opinion, is fine. That being said, I am using version 1.099 of the unofficial community patch that was once available at nogripracing.com, although that mod is a little hard to obtain nowadays due to No Grip just not existing anymore. It's likely that that mod dialed out a handful of issues, but this is generally what I remember Shift 2 handling like. It's very similar, especially the braking, to GTR2. The braking is really intuitive, and it's actually easy to overcook the braking zone. The only real difference is on throttle. In GTR2 and GT Legends, you can loop the car pretty easy if you're not careful. This game, by comparison, has pretty close to infinite rear grip, and you'll see it on display here in this final hairpin in first gear. I can pretty much mat the throttle off the corner and nothing bad happens. The car doesn't even give me like a complimentary wiggle. That being said, the game has a good sense of weight and inertia through corners and under braking. And if you're wanting just a game to bomb around in that's kind of serious but at the same time kind of not and just lets you jump in, pick a car, and go with a familiar physics engine, Shift 2 is not a bad game to still have installed. I fire this up every couple of months just because it's easy to get a race going, and I'm still having a lot of fun with it.